And then things came closer to home, much closer. On October 16, 1943, the Nazis arrested 1,259 Jews in Rome, most of whom were women and children. And since we find ourselves in the middle of the Paris 2024 Olympics, let's start with the Berlin Olympics of 1936 and the fact that they actually went ahead, because by then Hitler's dictatorship was self-evident. And of course the central question is why? If there's no penalty to not participating and no background in the SS type of anti-Semitism, why did in fact 85% participate? Until recently, Jews hadn't been eager to go to Palestine because Jews are mainly dedicated to commerce. And commerce remains quite profitable for them when they live amongst Christians. But if, on the contrary, all and only the Jews come together, you have an enormous gathering of swindlers while lacking those to be swindled.
Welcome to History for the Curious. I'm Mena Reisner, and I host the internationally renowned lecturer, dynamic historian, and tour guide, Rabbi Aubrey Hirsch. Experience our history, confront dilemmas, and reveal the untold stories of 3,000 years of Jewish heritage, from Paris to Cairo, from the Russian Tsar to Maimonides, and from the Sinai Revelation to the French Revolution. Join the fastest growing Jewish history podcast in the world by subscribing to this channel and discovering the events that have shaped us into who we are today. Rabbi Hirsch, welcome back. We're continuing our Holocaust series, having just finished our two-part special on X-Troop. This podcast is Le'il Nishmas Rabbi Yitzchok ben Rabbi Avram in loving memory of Ivor Smith, who was very beloved in his community and especially to his family. So thank you for your sponsorship. Rabbi Hirsch, we've had a lot of feedback about the two episodes that we just completed. A lot of questions asked, but just to start with, people wanted to know what happened to X-Troop after the war.
Okay, we'll deal with that, and then we'll get to our new two-part series. So it wasn't so smooth. Peter Masters was released from the army in August 46, but still had to report to the police every month because he was technically still an enemy alien, and which means that after all he'd done for the country and the multiple times that he'd risked his life, he was still viewed as an outsider. George Lane, we last saw him having been imprisoned at a prisoner of war camp after his meeting with Field Marshal Rommel. Now, he is a lieutenant in the British Army. He escaped from this prisoner of war camp towards the end of the war, flew to England from Paris, which had been liberated. He is arrested when he arrives in England because of his German accent. He's held in prison until Major General Laycock, who's the chief of operations, got him released. And X-Troop's commanding officer throughout the war had asked the government that his men be made into British subjects, British citizens, which was repeatedly refused, even though the Polish and French troops of 10 Commando did get their naturalization papers during the war. But by July of 1946, it was brought up in Parliament, and in September 46, it was made official. I will add that most of X-Troop kept their new names because they felt that going back to the old meant revisiting the past and its loss, obviously, and that was too painful.
So they all ended up in England?
No. Some in Israel, some in the United States. A lot did end up in the UK.
Wow. Okay, so this week we are doing another two-part Holocaust-related series, but on a different subject.
Yes, we are going to cover various supporters of Hitler, Yimach Shemo, before and during the war. Not financial or military support, but you might call it implied support, social support, and we're going to start from the early 1930s when he needed it most. And since we find ourselves in the middle of the Paris 2024 Olympics, let's start with the Berlin Olympics of 1936 and the fact that they actually went ahead, because by then Hitler's dictatorship was self-evident. There was no democratic government. He didn't allow any opposition, even in newspapers or on radio. There were no trade unions, and as we've mentioned, concentration camps had already been established, and obviously German Jews had been banned from participating in any national sports and therefore in the Olympics, and therefore there were calls to move the Olympics from Germany or alternatively to boycott the games, and these calls came especially from the United States, and yet all 49 countries participated.
Well, there's an argument to be made that politics shouldn't have any place in international sports. Why would sportsmen sort of lose out?
Yes, perhaps that is adequate justification. But that has to be a rule that applies across the board. And, I would point to the 1980 Olympics in Moscow when the Americans decided to boycott and pressured other countries into doing so, which at least 20 did. And we bear in mind a very big difference between boycotting the USSR, which was a world superpower, to whom a boycott would not and did not make any real difference, as opposed to boycotting Hitler's Germany, an emerging country with very little international standing, even less support. The message would have been a powerful one, particularly because Hitler was determined to use the Olympics as a showcase to prove to the world that the Germans were the master race, and he was very successful. Germany won double as many medals as any other country, including the United States. Hitler was given international prestige. He personally opened the games on August 1st, and a number of nations filed past on that day carrying out the Hitler salute, which I saw recently on a video. And, by the way, it was at these games for the first time that a flame was brought from Athens by relay to the stadium in Berlin. Hitler wanted to make the connection between the Greek worship of the Superman, of the physical hero, and the German view of the Aryan Übermensch.
See, he was already hinting on a world stage what the master plan was.
Yes, I mean, it didn't come with the World War domination, but nevertheless. And because the world's press descended on Berlin in 1936, Hitler ordered that the city be made less openly Jew hostile. So park benches, which, carried until that moment the invidious signs Nicht für Juden, suddenly disappear. And the arrests of Jews were muted, and the credulous world swallowed this narrative lock, stock and barrel. Just like the media today when it comes to, Hamas, when they label Haniyeh as a peacemaker. He just happens to be the number 2 of a terrorist organisation. That somehow didn't occur to these unbiased broadcasters like the BBC. Strange though it may be, because we know that the BBC is so unbiased in its coverage of Israel and the Jews. Although, perhaps he's a moderate terrorist. Maybe he only kills people between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday to Friday.
The real winner, you could say, of the 1936 Olympics was Hitler himself.
Yeah, the country was seen as modern and robust and investable, but actually my, so to speak, objections, if that's the way to put it, beyond the games themselves, go to the actions and statements of senior Olympic officials, particularly Avery Brundage, who in 1928 became the president of the American Olympics Committee and eventually became president of the International Olympics Committee, which he held until the 1970s. In September 1934, he went to Germany and met with German government officials, although he was not allowed to meet with Jewish sports leaders alone, and for some reason he didn't find this unusual. He comes back to the United States and says, "I was given positive assurance in writing that there will be no discrimination against the Jews." This is a Chamberlain moment, but 4 years earlier. And so he maneuvered the committee in America to send their team to Berlin, which, of course, the Nazi pledges of non-discrimination were completely false. And, in fact, Jewish American Olympic sportsmen accused Brundage of deliberately concealing the truth about Hitler and Nazi Germany. And as the Olympics controversy heated up in 1935, Brundage said there is a Jewish communist conspiracy to keep America out of the Games.